welcome back to another episode of Detonation. He's got the detonation bug. He's got the bug. He's realized. He's awake. He's wide. He knows he knows what's going on now on Detonation. So he's come back for more Detonation. That's great.
I have.
Arin, it's good to see you back.
Yeah, good to see you too, Steele. And as always, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to be on your show. It's a real pleasure for me.
Oh, no, yeah, no, it's the guests who make it great, and it's the organizers, and it's the whole community of people who come together to make Detonation what it is. As I always say, I'm just a guy with a microphone. It's really the community and the guests that make the show worth watching. So, no, thank you, and thank you to the community, and thank you to Transhumanist-party, and TAFs, and Talk Spectrum, and Mr. Holsopples 222, and Tom Ross, and Lincoln Cannon, and Kate Lovechuck, and everybody else who makes this community such a great, wonderful place, including yourself. It's my honor, my pleasure. I'm just a guy with a microphone. So, we're here today, Detonation, talking about depression, because super well-being and super happiness are actually core tenets, and it's good. Actually, you know what? I really want to thank you for bringing this up, because talk about immortechnics all the time, talk about longevity a lot, we talk about this stuff, health span we bring up, and health span, within the health span metrics, it's usually skewed a little bit, the conversation's usually skewed a little bit towards living a long, healthy life, but the happiness factor seems to just get shifted out just a little bit. But actually, when you ask people, either on Facebook or in a group or in a community, when you're talking to people, you say, what do you want? Actually, super happiness comes up all the time as a genuine aspiration, as what people want. And I thank you for actually bringing this up, because it's there, but we haven't really talked about it. We haven't really discussed it. We haven't really mentioned it. So this is actually going to be really, really, really good and really healthy discussion that we need. And, coming from that Confucian style, ideas that you have, that's also going to be really interesting to play it on top or underneath or wherever it's going. So the premise is transhumanism and depression, and how transhumanism can cure depression. Now, there's a lot to talk about in here, and we'll dig into it as we go. But I want you to open, broadside, say what you want, lead out, and we'll flow from there.
Yes, thank you so much, Steele. So some people have asked me, why focus on depression when it appears that the majority of people in the transhumanist movement are discussing things such as longevity, lifespan, health span, and so forth, which are, of course, very important things to discuss. But along with the length of life comes quality of life. And so why talk about depression? Why try to cure it? Well, I've got some figures here for our viewers. So according to the World Health Organization, depression affects more than 300 million people worldwide. I suspect this number is understated, because in a lot of places, indeed, yes, there should be many more. In a lot of places, people don't really discuss depression and mental health. There are a lot of people who go undiagnosed. I suspect the actual number is a lot larger. We could have as many as 1 billion people or more suffering from depression.
I don't mean to step in your line here, but did you ever get a survey from the UN asking you?
No.
I didn't either. So there's unclassified, undocumented people as well who have been left out of the survey. I'm not exactly sure how the survey was taken. I'm not too sure many people in North Korea, by the way, would have got surveyed, or whether they were just automatically ticked into the box. There's statistical problems, but continue. I really didn't want to step on your line there, but I couldn't help it.
No, that's certainly a great point. Now, we can only diagnose someone if they step forward, if a mental health professional diagnoses them. How about people who don't have access to a mental health professional, or perhaps people for logistical reasons or cultural reasons can't or don't come forward and reveal that they are suffering from depression? So that's really a good point. I've also read, so that was from the World Health Organization. Another study from MIT University in the United States says perhaps as many as 20% of the population will suffer a major incapacitating episode of depression during their lifetime. Not being under the blues, mind you, a major incapacitating episode. You're incapacitated. You basically cannot function. And some more statistics. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide, a major contributor to disease, and in some cases, of course, leads to suicide. There are tens of thousands of cases of suicide just in the United States alone. So if you just look across the whole of the planet, we have quite a big problem here with depression.
Yep, absolutely, and it's different, and it's of different rates and different. Depression. Actually, you bring up a point there. Let's formulate this ground rule of depression. It's not just feeling sad. It's not just like your sports team didn't win the whatever, and now you're feeling a bit down, and you're like, oh, well, that's bad. I really wanted them to win. It's not like that. It's not a low mood. It's debilitating disease. It's more than just a low mood. It's a serious condition that affects your physical and mental health. And the thing about depression is, if you get depressed, and it has a compounding effect. It flows over into the other parts of your life. The social part of your life, the religious part of your life. It could impact your job, which impacts your income stream, depending on your wealth. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck, so that doesn't really help them. And then all the other things compound on top of that, and you can go from being a quite a normal-ish sort of person. We're all a bit messed up in a way, but you can go from being a normal-ish person to a destitute mess quite quickly, depending on your scenario, and also depending on your social welfare in your country. In Australia, if you fall ill from depression, it's probably, if in Canada too, you're probably a little bit better. You got a bit of a safety net there. Someone's going to catch you. It's not in the government's interest to let these people fall through the cracks, because human capital is something that, it's more valued in a country like this, or in Switzerland or in Sweden, where if they just let you go straight on the street, it takes a long time to build your skills back up to the point where you become functional with a high society again. So they have this infrastructure in place because they have a premium on human capital. Now, if you're in the United States, for example, or if you're in China, or if you're in India, there's not so much of a human capital premium. So if you get depressed and you fall through the cracks, I'm sorry, but you're probably unless you have enough wealth to sustain that fall, you're probably going straight to the floor. You're probably going straight to the streets. No one's going to catch you. And luckily in China, and you talked about it last time on your show, there's Confucian values, there's other things like the family structure, which is still intact, and they might be able to catch you. India is the same. You have family structure, but if your family's not in a good shape either, it's a horrible thing, and it impacts other people all around. The depressed person has a social circle, has a family circle, has a work circle, and it impacts all of these things. So those 300 million base minimum that you mentioned, that has a throw-out impact to billions of people. The billion people that you mentioned pretty much has a throw-out to everybody else on the planet. Everybody watching this broadcast, well, that's not many people, everyone who watches PewDiePie or whatever, everybody knows somebody depressed, right? And that's the big point. And transhumanism says we have to sort of invoke solutions to this in certain ways. But continue. This is so interesting.
Well, Steele, I think you just brought forward so many good points there. Firstly, about family. Look, family can, with their support, ease some of the pain of depression, but sadly, even that's not enough. And which is why I always go back to, we need a cure for depression. So currently we've got some treatments for depression. We don't have a cure for it, however, right? And so going back to my first point, which I made was, What we're talking about now is just not just feeling the blues. As you said, your sports team lost, so you're feeling quite sad about that. You'll get over that, right? Or maybe you just had a breakup. You'll feel sad for some time. You'll get over that. But what we're talking about is this debilitating sort of mood disorder that's quite difficult to shake off. And as you said, if we have 300 million people or a billion people, it's got effects that it will affect many, many more people, not just the people who are suffering from the condition. It will affect their family, their coworkers, and so forth. I'm sure the impact to companies, that's billions of dollars in lost productivity. Some people might say if they're of the more libertarian sort of thinking, might say, well, it's not government's responsibility to look after these people. Now, that's a separate discussion for another time. But even if someone doesn't approve of their government helping people with this disorder, I would say there's billions of dollars in lost productivity to the private sector. So I do believe it behooves us, all of us, to work together, no matter where we're from or what form of government we live under, or what sort of economic system we think is best. We all need to coalesce. Well, firstly, we all need to recognize just how much of a problem it is, and then to coalesce and to put all our heads together, work together for a cure for depression, not just a treatment. Because we've got treatments, most of which are not very effective, which I'll get into shortly. But we've got to coalesce and come up with a cure for depression, just like smallpox.
That's a wonderful statement, absolutely. Just like smallpox. And my assessment was a little narrow-minded in the fact that, it was a sort of a collapse theorem where it's like you get depressed, then you collapse into this void. And it's not always the case, because a lot of people deal with depression in different ways. Your prime minister or your president of the United States or your elected official may or may not be depressed, but they're dealing with it in their own way. The fact that they got into elected office might be one of their coping mechanisms. You would not know. I mean? So other people take drugs because they're looking for neuro supplements. They maybe they can sustain that lifestyle. If they can't sustain that lifestyle, they take bad drugs. And so, for example, the Wolf of Wall Street, he goes out and he lives a party lifestyle. He's totally depressed, but he's got a lot of money and it looks like a cool sort of life, but he deals with it in a manic way. Here in Australia or in America, for example, you've got natives, you call them Aboriginals here, you call them Native Indians there, or Native Americans, and they might, deal with it in ways that, cope with drug and alcohol abuse or petrol sniffing or something else in these countries. Even Indian natives in the Amazon rainforest deal with it in a different way. So people deal with depression in different ways, and they exhibit their depression skills in different ways. Some companies might be built off the back of depressed people. I'm not sure. We're not sure exactly how this it's not always a collapse scenario. That's what I'm saying, and it's debilitating. Right. But yes, it's a huge problem because the majority of people, and even if they are an elected official and they're doing well in societal standards, that's not something that we want, and we don't want them to go and do cocaine behind the behind the scenes. Because if you're a person in power, if you're a banker or a politician or a military official, and you're depressed and you're doing some sort of you're misusing your power or whatever in a way because of your depression, I mean, that's also really bad, right?
Right, absolutely. So when speaking about people suffering from depression, I'll often speak to people and they'll say, well, so-and-so is very successful, they've got a great career, a great wife or a great husband, a terrific family, and they've got everything anyone could ask for. How could they be depressed? And people just don't understand, Steele. You can have every sort of material comfort in the world, and you still might be morbidly depressed. Additionally, you might be in a situation in which you're suffering from depression, but you're somehow able to function, as you just pointed out, which is very true. There are quite a few people who are managing to just get on with it, get on with their daily life. But we need to ask if that's a really good quality of life, if they're just somehow just struggling through life. Yes, it's true they're getting through. Yeah, it's true they haven't taken their own lives yet, but or maybe they never, maybe hopefully they never will. But we've got to ask if that's a good enough scenario for us, whether we're okay with this situation in which people are somehow managing to function, but that's really not optimal.
Yeah, and it's around it's notions of not just depression, but it's also stress and anxiety as well. These are also prominent areas. And I forgot even I'm not sure how many genders there are anymore or whatever, but it impacts the different genders as well differently. And it's hard for one gender to say, whatever, but it definitely impacts different genders differently as well, in different social structures. So we need solutions, and this is the short thing is we need solutions, and there are some chemical treatments, you said. There's pharmaceutical, and there's definitely abuse in the pharmaceutical industry that's taken place, and they've seen it as a business opportunity to get people hooked, and that's not what we're talking about. We don't want that. We're talking about actual sort of neurological solutions or super happiness embedded in transhumanism. What is that? What does that even look like? What does that mean?
Well, that's such a good question, Steele. I think, though, before we discuss potential solutions to the issue, I think it's maybe helpful to discuss what the current treatments are.
Sure.
So you mentioned pharmaceuticals. So current treatments for depression include pharmacological, which is, as you said, basically drugs such as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, right? Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft, any number of these drugs that many millions of people are taking on a regular basis consistently. And along with that, there's the non-pharmacological treatments, which is something like cognitive behavioral therapy, whereby you sit down with a trained practitioner, psychotherapist, and along with this person, you work on your depression, right? Doing any number of exercises. And finally, there are currently technological treatments for depression. One of them being cranial electrotherapy stimulation, such as the Fisher-Wallace stimulator, which is a small. I'm sure you've heard of it or have seen it. It's a small handheld device that sends a gentle electrical impulses to your brain. So you've got electrodes and you hook them up here, and it sends up to 4 milliamps of electrical signals to your brain, a form of neurostimulation. There's, of course, electroconvulsive therapy, which results in quite a few side effects, could lead to memory loss, brain damage in some cases. So the issue I have with all of these current treatments is they're not very effective, unfortunately. Not a single one of them has resulted in a cure for depression, not one. And furthermore, all of them, with the exception of perhaps cognitive behavioral therapy and or the cranial electrotherapy stimulators, they all have side effects, some of them really bad. And so what I would prefer is a solution. Well, firstly, I prefer a cure, but if we don't have a cure, then a treatment that's efficacious and which doesn't have side effects. So these are the current treatments we have, but as I said, unfortunately, they've not been very effective. People might argue that. Well, I say we have facts that depression is on the rise worldwide. Here's some more data from the World Health Organization. The total estimated number of people living with depression worldwide increased by 18.4% between 2005 and 2015 to 322 million people. Now, even if this increase is due to better and more accurate diagnosis, and even if it's because more people came forward, well, the incidence of depression isn't decreasing, which is a cause for concern.
Wow. Yeah. And what we're supposed to be in a society that's sorting these problems out. We're supposed to be creating conditions, intellectual conditions, and organizational conditions that's sorting these problems out. But the modern world has massively increased the amount of depression. I think. Unless it's just the statistical data is around, but no, there is definitely this. And you mentioned Zoloft and these other antidepressants, these pharmaceuticals, and Trump, President Trump. I remember watching. He was in the White House Situation Room or something, and I don't know. I was watching one of his things, and he just said. All right, he basically said, I'm gonna cure depression. Johnson & Johnson have this new product out. We can give it to all the vets. You basically just sniff it, and your depression is gone. And he said, wow, I just solved depression. Basically, that's what he said. So, yeah, Trump solved depression, so we can move on. We don't need any solutions.
Right. Well, I don't remember that discussion, but I will tell you that it's unlikely to be true.
That's the joke. It's not. It's definitely not solved, and we need Arin here to help us do it. So, so let's talk about transhumanist solutions to depression. If you want, if that's the next one.
Yes, absolutely. So, in my mind, we've got to cure it however we can. There are some promising developments. I'll go from pharmacological to non-pharmacological, sure. Right? So, talking about medicines for depression, look, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, they are currently doing MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. And it's proven to treat PTSD successfully in, get ready for this, 2 to 3 sessions. Now, which doesn't mean we have an absolute cure for PTSD and depression, but we've got to admit that that's far more successful than someone taking SSRIs or other sort of drugs for PTSD. Of course, as you know, MDMA is still a Schedule I drug, which means the authorities have deemed it to have no practical uses, which flies in the face of this research that MAPS is doing. Currently, it's in phase 3 trials, and what they hope that it will that the authorities will allow them to use that for treating PTSD. One could ask the question, why couldn't we do that for depression, right? So we do currently have possibilities of a pharmacological nature to treat depression, but I prefer a cure or a treatment that doesn't have side effects, because any one of these drugs has side effects, and then there's always the risk that someone overdoses and so forth. What we also have currently, there's a lot of promise shown in deep brain stimulation, right? So earlier I talked about the Fisher-Wallace stimulator, which is a form of neurostimulation. We send gentle electrical impulses to the brain. Deep brain stimulation involves implantable devices in the brain. And actually, they're currently using it for treating Parkinson's disease, and it's an approved method to treat Parkinson's, which affects the numbers from the World Health Organization are more than 10 million people worldwide. But why aren't we using it to treat depression, something that affects more than 300 million people worldwide? So that doesn't make sense to me. Of course, deep brain stimulation is still an unexplored frontier for the most part. But imagine, and I'm just thinking now as an idea, imagine if we had an implantable device which could be installed, for lack of a better term, in someone's brain, a person who's suffering from major depression. And imagine if we could monitor this person's brain, if the device could monitor the person's brain, and when they needed it, send electrical impulses to the correct location, and thereby treat the depression or even stop it from even occurring. Imagine if we had such technology. That would really be a game changer.
Absolutely, and you know, it's interesting that you bring up MDMA because that comes from the, you know, the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, late 50s as well, I guess. The sexual revolution time. You know, Timothy Leary leading the vanguard charge on that, Terence McKenna and others. But a lot of these
Right.
guys who, you know, explored this, Alan Watts, LSD, MDMA, you know, pharmaceutical, you know, counter pharmaceutical mushrooms, these alternative, you know, deep drug experience world. Yeah, we were talking about this with Dr. Jeremy the other day. You know, these are the guys who were sort of super excited about computers and the VR landscapes and the VR worlds as new escape realms. And you know, we're going to reshoot that episode with Dr. Jeremy because the sound quality was awful on my end. I did a terrible job. I was all over with the sound quality that day because I was just having problems. But I'd like to ask him about this idea of curing or treating people with depression with VR simulated worlds, for example. You know, you know, there's chemical ideas, VR worlds, and you know, implanting something into your head as well. I know there have been studies drip feeding DMT into depressed people or clinical trial patients as well. But you know, and the studies are mixed. Again, it's going to be really hard until we do reverse brain engineering and we actually figure out what is consciousness, neurobiology. It's all up in the air until we work out what is really fundamentally what is consciousness, and then you can work forward from there. Because once all the other components we know, you know, we've only just recently learned how important our stomachs are connected to our brain. Everybody knows about the little brain in your heart where the neurons are. You know, it's in the human body, the mind. You know, it's so complicated, and there's so many inputs.
Right.
You know, some people say, oh, it's nature or it's nurture or it's you know, it's it's genetics, it's your genes jumping. You know, you're getting trauma from your ancient, you know, caveman great grandfather. You know, what the hell's going on? So yeah, these are really complicated issues, and it's going to be really hard until we figure out A, what is consciousness, B, reverse brain engineering to figure out what is this brain, and actually is it independent from our body. I don't really think so. I think it's evolutionarily being built in, which is going to make, you know, things like mind uploading. I'm going to have a mind uploading expert onto the show at some point. One of the fans of the show, Mike DeVerde, is sorting that out for me. It's going to make that incredibly hard because, you know, they're talking about the mind, and you always see pictures of the mind like this massive jelly, you know, out on the stage. But it's not really like that. I think it's far more complicated than this massive jelly here. It's actually, you're kind of looking at the whole body experience at that point, especially if your mind is connected to everything else and it's a functioning capacity for everything else. So, really interesting. And there should be solutions, and there should be ideas, and there should be notions on happiness. And this is what you're presenting here, because you know, in a world where you've got a roof over your head, food in your belly, you got epic amounts of stimulus if you want it, either that be entertainment or intellectual. You can even watch Detonation if you wanna. I mean, that exists nowadays for some reason, but it exists. But you know, you can. There's plenty to do. I mean, just you can sit on a train all day and look out the window, or you can go to therapy, or I mean, there's plenty to do in today's world, and it's not hard to see. I mean, depression is pervasive, but you would hope that people would find hope in the world and would find stimulus and would find a reason to live and would find a reason to escape this. But if it's a chemical process, well, then it's about sorting the chemicals out so that they don't have to be depressed. Because counter to what everyone thinks, depression ain't good, it ain't funny, and no one who is depressed really wants to be depressed.
Correct. Yes, Steele, I think you made a very good point there. Of course, this is very complex stuff, and I don't mean to suggest that there is a sort of silver bullet cure to depression. It is very complex. Additionally, there are numerous theories about the cause of depression. Of course, the monoamine theory, which suggests it's due to neurological factors. Of course, there are other theories suggesting that it's genetic or, of course, environmental causes. My sort of thinking is, and of course you mentioned consciousness, which is a fascinating topic, of course, very fascinating to me, and I'm very much interested in it. I think that's obviously very complex as well. But in terms of depression, I think no matter what we think the root cause or root causes are, we should work on it. So if in fact it is neurological, well, then we could attempt to use technologies such as deep brain stimulation. If it's genetic, well, that would
CRISPR-Cas9, CRISPR-Cas9.
Yeah, exactly. CRISPR gene editing, that would be a good introduction to that. And if it's environmental, well, then there's socioeconomic things to consider there. But in my view, if it's environmental, that would probably be easier to solve than if it's genetic or if the cause is neurological. But whatever the cause or causes might be, I do believe we should work on them, all of them, and gather research, put everything together, and work on a cure.
Yeah, a cure sounds good, and a cure sounds something in line with what I'm thinking as well. I think the socioeconomic is the easiest to conceive for people, especially for an employment stimulus package. Many countries across the world, my own and yours definitely, I've put millions and millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, into implementation of different depression, I don't know what you have in Beyond Blue or something, whatever. I don't know, but these organizational facilities, because they're easy, because it's like a politician can stand in front of a big board and he can say, today we're putting $20 million into additional funding, and this is going to make me really good, and this is going to provide an extra additional 10,000 staff over 10 years, and that's cooks and cleaners and admin staff, and these people, communicate with, they liaise with organizations within community, whether they be corporate or state or or primary or they can liaise with primary schools and higher education. Hooray! So that's easy, right. And that's kind of. The world goes right up to the World Health Organization, like you mentioned there, where they try and do it on a country scale. But where they don't talk about, and what they don't talk about, is a cure, because that's much harder. That takes a lot more gusto. That takes a lot more political capital, and it opens up debates within the community. It's not a Pandora's box. It's an uncomfortable debate within the community, because you say that, and then people say, "Are you judging me? Are you judging me? Are you judging my mental health? Are you judging my condition? Are you going to take away?" There are people out there who depressed, but they're not actually depressed. They like the drugs. I mean, there's drug addicts. They exist as well as a societal problem. There's also people out there that there's all sorts of people out there, and the socioeconomic one, I think, is the easiest for politicians to get behind, and that's the generic stimulus. But what you're talking about is hard. It's complicated. It's it takes a lot more guts, and you have to stand up against the religions who don't want it, or the secular people who I can stand on my own 2 feet, thank you very much. These types, or the pharmaceutical company that benefits from this demographic or this collection of people, whatever. The political class that like a subdued population, because that means a no peasant uprising tomorrow, and that's always good if you're an entrenched oligarch. So, what do you say? Like, I agree. It is, but it's part of transhumanism. Absolutely, super happiness.
You're right, and so even if we did have a cure for it today, you can never force this sort of thing upon anyone. Just like you can't force life extension upon anyone, and nor would I ever want to. What I would hope for, Steele, is a scenario in which we do have more successful treatments and or a cure, and available for anyone who wanted it, regardless of their economic situation, regardless of their location, regardless of where they might be living. And so I would want to have that for the people who really want it, who really need it. And of course, you can't force it upon anyone. I suppose if someone wants to continue being depressed, and if that's what they really want, then you can't force treatment or a cure on them, unfortunately. But we should have this for people who want it. And you're absolutely right. Looking at it from a political perspective, I do think that it would take someone of extraordinary courage to go to the public and announce that they were going to have a war on depression, right? But I think it's very necessary, and it's very noble, but not just for politicians, but for corporations and for society. Everyone needs to get on board, because, as I said, and which you pointed out as well quite eloquently, depression affects a lot more than the person who's suffering from it. It affects their family, it affects society, their friends, their colleagues. It affects everyone on different levels, of course. And if we if we accept that transhumanism is about improving the human condition, then it would make sense that we should also focus on a cure for depression. And in order to do that, and yes, you're absolutely right, it is challenging, it is complex, but it's not impossible, and it's worth fighting for and working on, because it has such huge implications. And we've got to use technology now, whether it's CRISPR gene editing or deep brain stimulation, or even nanotechnology, perhaps. We have to leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, and that's why I love transhumanists, because we can keep pushing the limits of what's possible, and sorting out issues and problems that are pervasive and old-fashioned, and they should have been. It's like no one, in the long run, no one really objected to the people stamping out, the Black Death in Europe, right?
Right. Right.
Maybe the gravedigger, but he was kind of like, it keeps me employed, but, maybe I'll get that thing as well. Maybe the church guy was getting sick of it by the end of all the funerals. So, when people look back, with hindsight, they say, oh, the moment. Oh, why didn't we do that earlier? Why didn't we advocate for super longevity earlier? Why didn't we advocate for super happiness earlier? Because it comes back to one of these things we talk about all the time on the show. A lot of depression, a lot of, there's media-induced depression. That's, you turn on the TV and, the politicians and the media and the finance people are all in cahoots, and, they get you stressed and worried about a guy in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan. You're in Georgia, or you're in Kentucky or somewhere, and you're stressing over a guy with an AK-47 in the middle of Afghanistan, like he's going to come and get you in the night. I mean, there's this induced fear from big media and from big finance and from big corps to keep people running around in a fear-induced state. Fear and depression are different, absolutely, but fear and anxiety and stress, they all add up and they all tick up. But that's their market. That's what they do. So that's a problem there. This fear-mongering, fear-induced society is a problem. And there was one other thing that I was actually going to say, but I've totally forgotten that. So let's just talk about that while I try and remember the actual thing I was trying to say.
No, that's another great point you made, Steele. Certainly, there's a lot of media-induced anxiety, and I do think, now I'm not quite sure what the cause is. It may very well be that these forces have very nefarious aims, and it may very well be that one of their goals is to keep people in a fear-induced state. Now, I certainly hope that's not the case, but it's certainly possible. Additionally, you talked about pharmaceutical companies not really wanting a cure for depression, because if we did have a cure for depression, right, let's just say it's something, whether it's a pill or a technology, and you're cured, well, then they lose a customer. And so they could potentially lose millions of customers. And so maybe, I hope this is not the case, but maybe these companies are actively holding back further research on depression.
Yeah, and this is actually the point I was going to bring up, and you reminded me, and I thank you for that. Disruptive technologies. Transhumanists are all about disruptive technologies. Why? Because they look that, I'm not an engineer, but a lot of engineers come on here, and you start to get an engineering mind when you talk to engineers all the time. I kind of like it. I kind of don't like it, because it actually makes me really think about solutions real hard. And I kind of like to brush over solutions because I'm kind of lazy like that. But that's what they do. They just think about solutions. They say, problem X, solution. And you see the thing about me, and I kind of know how the middle, because public policy and this and that, how to play both sides, the problem and the solution, off to each other. And then you say, and then it's 30 years later and you're still in the same government bureaucracy saying, oh, but those people, they don't need that, so I kind of understand that idea pretty well. But actually trying to sort out the solutions is kind of interesting. And we talk about disruptive technologies all the time, and depression is a problem. And then you look at the middle market, you look at the middlemen, you look at the gatekeepers, and you say, who are actually the gatekeepers to the cure? And then you start to see who all the players are. And that's happening. That I find that across a wide array of these topics that we come across, whether that be super longevity, space colonization, electric vehicles, depression. It's one of these problems. Pharmaceuticals, fear-induced society, economic inequality, misdirected funding, looking down rabbit holes and rabbit warrens and all this sort of stuff. Why? Because if you run around the central issue, all the gatekeepers keep collecting cash in the middle. And sometimes those gatekeepers are just systems. And sometimes you have to just throw out systems. It's not some greedy guy who's sitting in one of these buildings here behind me or whatever. It's a system that's been in there for so long, and that's what I kind of mean. It's like curing, like nobody said, in the long run, nobody really said curing smallpox was a bad idea. Everyone sort of took a collective sigh of relief. But there might have been one or two people who had their business model disrupted in the meantime. But actually, as a system, you know what I mean? It's
No, that's a good point, and that you just brought up. It may very well be that, as you said, it's sort of a system that's always been there. It's always been run this way, and human beings are an interesting lot. We don't seem to change very much, right? But unfortunately, in tackling an issue as pervasive and devastating as depression, we're going to need change, specifically a change in the way we think about it, a change in the way we work on treatments, and a change in the way we look at a cure. And I would say no matter what challenges there are, and certainly there are challenges, not just challenges in terms of treatment, right? There's societal challenges, there's different belief systems. You might have people out there who think that this is a normal state of affairs, and which takes me back to, I believe it was, let's see, what book was it that I was reading? Yes, Citizen Cyborg by James Hughes, in which he quoted Francis Fukuyama saying, it was either him or Leon Kass, saying something like, that sadness is a way of life, and what would these people have accomplished if they hadn't been depressed, and so forth. But I don't think it's normal at all. I don't think being morbidly depressed for days, weeks, months, years at end is normal. This is not a normal state of affairs. This is a deeply undignified and undesirable state of affairs. And if we have any shred of decency, of empathy, of kindness within us, we'll agree that we've got to do better at solving this, not just treating it. And so I always like to, so you just mentioned engineering. I always like to talk about, by the way, I love engineers and I love engineering. And we talk about root cause, right? And so I don't want a workaround, right? A workaround is maybe just take a pill and I'll feel okay for some time and then it'll come back again. We don't want a workaround. We want a resolution to the issue by finding what the root cause or root causes are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in human nature, transhumanism, human nature is marginally good. And so that's good, and that's kind of where you have to be if you want to sort out these issues of depression. And I agree with you. Someone being depressed for months and years over end is not a natural, normal state of affairs. No. Even if it is, it shouldn't be the case. People,
Thank you.
In the Constitution of the United States, it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, how can you pursue happiness if you're morbidly depressed? So shouldn't one of the first wars be on a war against depression, or at least even classed as an illness, right? So, because you can't pursue happiness if you're depressed. Stress and anxiety, different topics within the same realm, but right. Let's just put them over there for a second. Let's class depression as an illness, and then you realize that the constitutional function of the United States, be it what it may, pursuit of happiness, you know what I mean? Or Declaration of Independence, or the Declaration of Man, or whatever it is. So,
right.
Totally agree. It should be a state function. There should be a state war against depression as embedded in a constitution, right?
Absolutely. That's just such a good point you brought up. The pursuit of happiness. And yes, you're right. It's going to be very difficult to pursue happiness or have any semblance of a normal functioning life if you're struggling with something as horrible as major depression. Yes, it is an illness. It's a major affective disorder. That's the actual category in neuroscience. It's considered an affective disorder.
Yep. Well, there you go. So it's embedded in your Constitution, America. So wake up. That's what you should be. You should be war on cancer, war on depression. Totally agree. And then you find out who the gatekeepers are, and you go from there. The USTP. We're involved in politics, and it's this merger of the science world, the empirical, and the political, and that's hard. I mean, that is hard, and right. That is partly why I embrace the challenge. I mean, I think I like hard things. I like to take on hard challenges, and I think that's fun. That's how I keep myself entertained. And the Transhumanist-Party, the core ideals are, supports significant life extension. That's one. It supports cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed and animated by reason, science, and secular values. And the Transhumanist Party supports the use of science, technology, rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential threats to the human species. Well, I would say this would go into almost all, but looking at that third value, The Transhumanist-Party supports the use of science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential risks to the human species. Well, if you have 300 million people categorized as depressed, that's a non-functioning element. And okay, Gennady, you're listening. I know you are watching. But Gennady, even in his children's book, and Gennady is one of the key transhumanists of the 21st century. He's up there with Ray Kurzweil. He's up there with all the other guys. Charlie, he's a core component. And one of his arguments is the more people there are on the planet, that's the more computers essentially or functions of consciousness to enable and sort out problems. Well, if you have 300 million depressed people running around, that eliminates 300 million really good, let's even say that 100 million of them, for argument's sake, are high functioning. That's still 200 million people that are essentially out of the game and aren't supporting that theory. So what do you say to that? It's a transhumanist idea we need to unlock. Let's say 200 million minds ASAP, right?
We most definitely have to. And whether it's 100 million, 300 million, whatever it may be, that number is too high, right? And you're right. These are individuals who, because they're suffering from depression, they're not able to fully actualize themselves. They're not able to be all they can be, right? Imagine the amazing contributions these people could have been involved in had they not been struggling with a major affective disorder. And in a sense, we could unlock the creativity, the passion, the instinct, the vision of all these people, right? And listen, everybody deserves a dignified life. It doesn't matter where they come from. They might be from South Sudan or the United States or Germany or Australia or China, wherever they may be. Everybody deserves to have an optimal human condition. And I think if we're able to better treat depression, we're going to have there are just going to be so many amazing things coming out of this. It's not just going to be curing this person and then this person's happy again, but this person's going to be everything they can be, everything they wanted to be but couldn't be because it was taken from them so mercilessly.
Absolutely. And as they are in that depressed state, they just become a unit of consumption. That's all I would class them as. It's crude, but if I'm looking at a government balance sheet, because a lot of them struggle to clothe themselves, house themselves, feed themselves. These are all gigantic tasks. Maybe they consume some alcohol or something, leaving them on a stimulus package. So they go from being enlightened creatures. In Buddhism, this Zen Buddhist concept of an enlightened human creature to a consuming, eating function. Right. And that's not what we want, because the human potential, the human capacity, the human imagination, the human spirit, the ability for humans to go out and solve problems, solving problem complexes that are built and inherent in human beings. Whether or not you have the scarcity problem and Ernest Becker and all that in the background, death denial and all that, it doesn't matter. The fact is that they have immense amount of creativity, even in their daily lives, and to see them struggling with such basic tasks is depressing in itself.
Right. Well, you're so right about that. You're so right about that. Even if one isn't suffering from depression themselves, seeing the plight that so many people are in, it's heartbreaking. It just, you never want to see that, but we do see it. And we do experience it, even if we're not suffering from depression, because now I don't want to sound all new age. I don't want to go all new age on you, but we have to admit that on some level, listen, on a real basic level, we inhabit the same planet, right? We all do a lot of similar things. We all get up in the morning and have our food and go to work. Maybe not all of us, but maybe some of us are studying. But we are all we are all participating in the human experience, right? And by elevating the human condition, by alleviating and or curing depression, I think that's really going to go a long way, because we are really all in this together.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful words. And if you're interested, I also on Detonation we also talk about this notion of cognitive liberty as well. And Talk Spectrum down there, Kristen Conklin, is a scientist. She's awesome. I love her. But
She
anyway,
is.
yeah, she's really cool. But Talk Spectrum is this idea, this notion, this idea that basically you can go in as far as you want with it, but it's at the heart, it's cognitive liberty. You're entitled to your own liberty and your own cognitive functions, and depression is a disease, and depression is inhibiting your cognitive liberty, right? So
Right.
depression is taking away your ability to use your own brain in a functional way that enhances and helps society. And it replaces it with these negative thoughts, these mood swings, and all the other jibs and jives that goes with depression, and in a negative way. And that's taking away from your cognitive liberty. And you are, as a person, entitled to your cognitive liberty as a natural
Correct.
right and as a law in the United States.
Yes, well, you're so right about that. I had never really considered that, but yes, cognitive liberty. And when someone's suffering from depression, they're sort of trapped in this labyrinth of misery from which they can never really find escape, right? Even if they're somehow able to fall asleep, they may suffer from nightmares and so forth. So it's like a bad dream, but you can't really ever escape from it. And you're right, one can never really have cognitive liberty if they're suffering from something like depression. And one of the reasons why this topic is so near and dear to me is because the depression doesn't care whether you're young or old, whether you're black or white, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're physically healthy or not. It's an equal opportunity destroyer of life. And in the transhumanist community, we often talk about reversing aging so that we can eliminate the incidence of things such as cancer and heart disease and so forth. But while heart attacks and cancer may end lives quickly, depression tends to, not always, but it ends lives very slowly, ruthlessly robbing people of their happiness, stripping away their dignity, and beating and just drowning them in a swamp, in a never-ending nightmare that keeps repeating every day. And if we talk about having a better future, a better human condition, then we also have to look at better treatments and or a cure for depression. I mean, which is why I talk so much about it in the transhumanist community, because I think we've got a lot of intelligent people and wonderful people who are advocating for life extension, which is something I very deeply agree with. But I also think we should advocate more for a cure for depression, because we can and must leverage science and technology to improve the human condition by eliminating depression.
Well, I want you to know that I thank you very much for bringing up this important topic, because super happiness is something that is right at the center, but it's not really talked about too much, because I think everyone gets excited, they get enthusiastic about the technology, they get excited about other aspects of transhumanism, because transhumanism is such an exciting topic, but they get distracted, and then they sort of lose the focus of this end goal of this happiness complex that's embedded right within the framework of transhumanism. So, Arin, thank you for coming on Detonation and talking about depression. It's an important topic. Super happiness, as I said, it's right at the center. It's right at the center of the mandala of transhumanism. And it's something that I need to. I just not many people bring it up, and I don't think about it too much either because it's you see it. And I even said it. So I think Dinora brought it up in her thing, and I said super happiness. And even though I don't think about it that much, but because it's kind of the end goal, and we're kind of saying, all right, we'll do this to live longer, and we'll take this, and we'll do this, and these technologies will help us sort out these problems. But actually, at the end of the day, when you really think about it, it should be making people happier. We shouldn't just make we've got a caution against making technology for technology's sake or advancing for advancement's sake or whatever. We have to run into these human conditions and say, actually, we have to sort out some of these depressing and sad, depression definitely in the meantime, because that's kind of the end goal, to make people happier. Health span, it's embedded right in there, and that's something we talk about all the time. And I really want to thank you for highlighting that aspect of transhumanism.
Well, thank you so much, Steele, for your support. In helping us advocate for these noble causes. I do believe mental health is such an important part of health and the health span, and every time someone can get on your show and spread the word and demonstrate that transhumanism is a force for good, then I think we will have gone a long way to improving the human condition by eliminating disorders such as depression.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much again.
No, thank you. That's really appreciate it. And we look forward to you coming on, talking with other people as well. Benzyme, perhaps we'll have a show like that. We can talk about mainstreaming transhumanism and efforts to mainstream transhumanism. But let's make this. Let's take away from this show that I really want to take away. Is let's embed this a little bit more in our conversations. Let's talk about super happiness, even if we don't have to talk about depression as a disease, because it's one. But I think the reason that the super happiness is there is because then that entails all of the notions. So I'm gonna thank you, and I'm gonna start promoting that as well. I'm gonna use that as a talking point. Because it right there is it's at the core. Everybody knows it, but I think we just don't talk about it that much because we get sort of excited and we get we think we're big ideas people, and we sort of miss the mark a little bit with super happiness and anti-depression, and actually why we want to sort out a lot of these problems, so make us happier. And if we're happier, then we're gonna, as a society and as a whole, we're gonna take a lot of these geopolitical, economic, all these other stresses that we can go on and on. All these stresses, a lot of these stresses will start going off, and then instead of it's just being a quirky YouTube channel called Detonation, more and more people's voices will be rising up saying, actually, life's not that bad. We can sort out these environmental issues. We can sort out these sociological issues. Maybe we don't need to go war with each other. I mean, yesterday we did, but again, the hindsight thing going, maybe we actually don't need to. Go back and watch the previous episode where, we're talking about the first stage of molecular nanomachines, essentially these machines that potentially could be producing mass producing goods and services. So this sort of stuff can eliminate production methods so that we don't have to use China anymore as a workshop and have to have this sort of crazy trade system just so we don't go to war with each other and destroy the planet in the process and stuff like this. So it's exciting. I thank you. It's great. And thank you very much for coming back on Detonation.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be here.
No problem. All right, that's Detonation, everyone. We're putting death out of business. Super happiness right at the center of the mandala of transhumanism. It is the goal. Thank you for highlighting that, sir.
Thank you.